Kia ora, everyone. Being a little bit risky again today. The weather looks unfortunately slightly grey. And if you'll remember from a couple of weeks ago when I got rained on, sometimes development streams can be incredibly exciting, and you can get a little bit drizzle on. I probably look a little bit worse for the wear. I have had an incredibly debating full and essay full week in that I judged at Jurassic IV, competed at Asia Queer Open, judged the John Hague moot on Monday, and then judged Interres last night. So my brain has just like been put through a washing machine. We're going to start in a couple of minutes just to give people an opportunity to join up. And we're going to be talking about pro-am debating. Pro-am debating, I think, is an incredibly useful tool both for you and for your am or for your pro, depending on which position you're speaking in. So we'll just go through ways to maximize that experience, because I think it is a wonderful experience, and to make sure you're developing yourself as a speaker, but also a human being who's part of a development community. So we'll just give it a couple more minutes, just to let people jump on. Give it one more minute. I can see Joe cooking inside. He's slicing something. It's unclear what he's slicing. He's wearing his nice gray jumper. Very well-dressed flatmates. I wandered downstairs. See, normally I dress quite nicely, but I wandered downstairs wearing these huge fluffy socks, some of my running shorts, this really old t-shirt after I'd been up. I had 3 hours sleep because of an essay rush. And Joe was there all nicely dressed because he was trying to get more into the nice dressing swing, and I was like, oh. Hope everyone else had fun weeks as well. Okay, so I reckon we can dive right in. You all know me. My name is Daniel. What we're going to do today is chat about pro-am debating, both to maximize your enjoyment if you're an am, or to maximize your enjoyment if you are a pro, because I think there are different things that you take out of the experience. And in many ways, what I'm going to start with is similar to things I normally start with, in that thinking about debating from a different perspective, being from a judging perspective, or speaking in a different position. I think these are all things that build your appreciation of debating, both as a activity, but also makes you better at the things you want to maximize when you're completing it. And in many ways, speaking as a pro, especially if you're younger in your careers, forces you to think about development in a very practical way. It forces you to think about what's important, and in many ways helps you formalize some of those links and some of those things that you've learned over time. So it's an incredible tool for forcing you out of your habits, making sure that you are taking on a different role in the prep room, taking on a different role within debates, and pushing your debating a little bit forward. The way I'm going to break down this discussion is obviously interspersed with whatever questions you have, so please send a message to the Google form if you have any questions about pro-am debating, or just pop a comment down below and I'll be able to answer it during the stream. So in addition to answering your questions, I'm going to be looking at the ways in which, if you are a pro, especially a new pro, you should be trying to maximize that experience for your am and take something new out of it for yourself. And then, so I think that discussion is also quite useful for ams, because if you go into the experience knowing what your pro is trying to do, you can have a little bit more of a collaborative approach to your own development there, and start to pick up on the things that they're doing and incorporate a little bit more into the way that you are approaching the debates and approaching speaking. And then I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of an am, because I have been an am in many teams. My first ever joint scroll teams was with Kayla Grant and Lucy Harrison, who are both just exceptional debaters and were miles better than me. And so it was lots of fun to go into those tournaments with them and have that learning experience. it just requires a slightly different perspective towards speaking in those positions. And there's a huge amount of transmission of ways of approaching debating that go far beyond just that. Here's how to make points. Here's how to build cases. It's also how to cope with pressure and how to adjust within debates when things don't go particularly as planned. How to convey the gravitas necessary to win debates. So yeah, going to talk about being a pro. Going to talk about being an am. So the reason why we thought this would be a cool episode to do is that there's quite a few people at Auckland who are going into second and third year who are going to be asked to take a little bit of a step up and take more of an active role in developing people coming behind them. And I know the temptation is just, it's really fun to be an AM. It's fun to be in teams where people are a lot better than you. But it's also good to give back. And not just give back, find ways to push yourself that aren't always, there's naturally people better than you, finding ways to create those incentives for improvement. And so if you are a pro going into it, I think a few things are important for you to know. So the first layer I'm going to approach is the human side of it. So how do you approach your AM? How do you put them in the right mind space? Then I'm going to talk about the techniques that you can use to help them learn particular things or encourage them. And then I'm going to talk about things that you should do to help you develop and the ways in which it can push you a little bit farther as a speaker. So if we start at that first thing, interpersonal skills, incredibly key to making sure that your AM is having a good time, making sure that your AM is going to be learning. So how necessarily should you approach those first few moments of when you've been given someone as an AM, say for example you've gone to Auckland Rumble or you've gone to Jurassic IV, and you're trying to make sure that trying to essentially step into this new role of being someone who is a little bit older and a little bit more experienced. I think the first thing to do is that to some degree you want to show them that you are by no means perfect, you're by no means authoritative, you still struggle with things in debating. But what they do need for you is a certain degree of confidence and reassurance. Because if you are a younger debater, and you will remember this, in fact, if you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable being a pro, it's probably because you still need, to some degree, this type of support and protection, is that a lot of things in debating don't make a huge amount of sense. Especially when you're coming in, you'll lose debates and you won't understand why you've lost. You will be beaten by teams that you think you should have beaten. You will feel incredibly frustrated when you try and make points and think you are getting there, but are unable to drag adjudicators across the line. So I think one of the incredible things that pros are able to do is just take this aura of not being able to understand, of feeling very frustrated, of pushing against things without really knowing what to push off against, and you can just cushion a lot of that interaction and allow them to focus on what actually is important to them. So if you are encouraging them and reassuring them and explaining things, and even if you can't explain things to them, telling them that it's okay not to understand particular things and that they need to focus on this, and this, and that can be a question that they answer later in their debating career, that gives an enormous amount of help to someone who is just coming into debating and is just dealing with it. Equally, it's a key opportunity to teach people some really important norms within debating. So this is not just what points should they be learning, how should they be approaching things, which is what we're going to talk about in a little bit. It's also about how they approach debating as a activity, rather than as like a set of skills that they need to learn. So that's things like encouraging your AM always to get feedback, but to focus on particular bits of the feedback to make sure that they're being structured and focused in the way that they're learning from debating. Teaching them these like values of how to learn as a debater is like quite an important thing. Making sure that they are actively listening to things while they're on the bench, and pointing out things that work particularly well within debates. Decoding the adjudication after the adjudications happened, just to make sure that they understand each particular thing. And I think one of the ways in which you can feel less awkward around an AM is to approach this in a slightly structured way. So often what I'll do is I'll make the AM that I'm with write down some things that they think didn't go well within the debate and that they did go well, so that you can have both positive reinforcement and criticism of things that need to do better. And then making sure that they go and talk to the judge specifically about those things, make sure that they get perspective, and then get an additional thing from the judge that they then will broaden their horizon, even if they're unable to solve it in that particular thing. Because I think, once again, when you are working with an AM, your job is not to suddenly make them into a brilliant debater. Your job is to broaden their perspective, make them aware of a lot of the problems that exist, and then point them towards solving it. So from a just general people management side of it, you need to be very reassuring, making sure that you're cushioning them against the things that could be incredibly frustrating and distracting and just generally harms their development. You're teaching them norms about how to be a better debater in terms of like how they learn, how they listen to things. And then of course the third thing is you just want to be encouraging them to be nice and to care about debating as an activity that is a bit bigger than them. Many times you'll be with like a very good AM, and that's like quite a unique role to be in, and so you need to be a little bit more careful there. But telling them about the things that really inspire you within debating, and explaining to them ways that they can, explaining to them that there's an arc to their debating career, and there's going to be those like ups and downs, but they need to be quite committed to the activity as something that is quite fun and quite meaningful, and the community that comes along with it. Getting them into that culture of debating and showing them that they can have a friend, but also this is a community that will open up to them, just leaves an enormous impact on an AM going forward. So helping them as a person, helping them as a speaker, helping them become a part of the community. The second thing that I wanted to chat about is, well, okay, you're a great person. You're going to be really nice to them. Congratulations. How do you make them a better debater? And this can be particularly frustrating when you yourself are still trying to improve and you don't know how to solve some of the problems that they're identifying within their speeches. So I think the first thing to do is remember that you're not there to necessarily give them the answers. You're there to encourage them to experiment, to think about things, to adopt some of the strategies that will slowly turn them into better debaters. And so if there is something that you have struggled with a lot, share it with them. Explain to them what that process of you getting better or solving that particular problem was, because they'll both understand the content of it, and they'll also be able to start to see that overall approach to debating that if they're able to learn is going to be incredibly helpful for them going forward. In terms of teaching them specific skills, making sure that they're able to identify the parts of their speech that have gone wrong, and then holding it to them across the scale of a tournament or a particular period of time helps them actually improve their debating rather than have huge amounts of feedback they're not particularly sure what to do with. And like Joe mentions this all the time, we give way too much feedback to younger debaters, and it's actually quite important to give them some narrow things that they can work on, so that they can actually implement something, see that it has an effect, get inspired by debating, and that like change is much more likely to stick. So helping them identify what's going to be important to them, and then focusing across a range of debates. The third thing is set them particular things to do in later speeches. So this is not just about identifying problems. This is about trying to push them to experiment, trying different orders of points, making sure that they're able to cope with the feedback they've been given. So for example, if they're given quite abstract feedback, giving them hey, here's a specific thing that you can do next time to try and make a point more effective. And so this is not necessarily, try and get them out of the framework that there's lots of things that are wrong with their debating that they need to fix. Get them into the mind frame is that they've got enormous potential and there's lots of things that they can experiment and try, but they need to feel comfortable making those adjustments within debates, especially in like a flexible world. Third thing you need to do is make sure that they're not overwhelmed by some of the very basic skills within debating. So often, if I'm with an AM for the first time and we're sitting down before the prep time has even started, I'll be like, okay, how do you write your notes? So start to have those conversations with them from the very first moment about practical ways they can improve particular things. Start to talk to them about what to do as a team on the bench. So explain to them, you're going to be listening while I'm writing these things, and I'm going to turn to you and ask like what the person has just said, and then equally I'm going to be listening. while you're writing your speech. And if you ever need a particular point, you'll be able to throw it to me. I'll come up with something and then I'll give it to you and you can slot it into those speech. Remember, you're not just developing a speaker in isolation, you're trying to make them into a better teammate as well. So in terms of A, dealing with all of like those frustrating practical things, but B, making sure that they learn how to be an effective teammate is a really useful thing that you can do with your AM. And then I just think the final thing that is important to do, just from like a skills perspective, is get them to try and carry those skills forward. So at the end of the tournament, go through the feedback they've been given, help them pull out the particular strands that are useful for them, and then make sure that say, okay, the next time you have this debate, you have any debate, even if it's not with you, they need to be thinking about this thing, and this thing. Making sure that you're linking up the feedback that they are given, and then hopefully the next day speak with a pro, they can be like, hey, my last pro told me that I need to fix this thing, and this thing. Can you hold this? Can you hold me to account on this? Can you make sure I'm doing that? That means that that person isn't just bouncing between different like wise elders who are passing them around and helping them learn particular things. They're actually having like a broader, cohesive development experience is incredibly good. And I think it's actually a very helpful habit to have, not just as a pro to an AM in terms of getting them to write out their feedback and then try and pull those themes from it, but I think it's an incredibly useful skill to have in debating in general. Whenever I go to a big tournament like Worlds or Australs, I'll always write down all of my feedback, and then at the end of each day, I'll be like, okay, what are the themes that emerged? Wow, Daniel, you're really not spending enough time impacting things, or you're not doing enough of this. So spotting those trends is probably one of the things that sets very good debaters apart from people. Well, it basically helps debaters get over the plateau when they seem to be repeating similar problems again and again without being able to develop huge amounts of things. Okay, got some cool questions. Question from Amba. How do you best bridge confidence gaps? It is incredibly ineffective to shout at someone about being confident. I think telling someone how good they are very rarely has an impact on their overall confidence. So if you are trying to just boost their confidence from a general perspective, you need to make that very specific. You need to be like, remember this thing that you did. Remember when the first debate, you fucked up this thing massively, and then they got you feedback and you improved. It doesn't matter how bad this particular speech was, you showed us there that you can improve, and you're going to continue to improve as long as you keep working out. So giving them that concrete evidence, and then if they need just a bit of a boost, people like, remember this good thing you do. It's a lot easier when you have an AM, like some AMs that I can think of, who are just like objectively really, 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 really good and have huge amounts of promise at that particular stage. They've already been quite successful, but still struggle with confidence. You just need to remind them of the things that they've done. And if people haven't been able to build up those achievements yet, you just remind them of the improvement arc. So you point to things that they've specifically improved on and help them get better at it. And then just, of course, remember, confidence is also about feeling supported. So there are a lot of incredible people within debating who, that's looking ominous, incredible people within debating whose role isn't to be like, wow, you're so great. They just listen to people when they've had like a shitty debate, and they say, hey, I understand what that feels like. Like, wow, I've also like lost X, Y, and Z debate. Like, tell me all about your thing. And then when they're done, remember, listen to them all the way. Let them tell them a story about where you really sucked in a particular debate and how you were able to pull yourself up for that. So obviously, like, making them feel like be their older sibling, be someone who has gone through that experience, and can just be like, wow, I really understand where you're coming from. It doesn't boost their confidence, but it helps them cope with the fact that they do struggle with confidence. Vegas. I think having matter, content-heavy motions at Pro-Am tournaments can be really helpful for dev, as AMs often struggle there. My favorite Pro-Am moment was when the motion at Southland Navy was this house would intervene in Myanmar to help the Rohingya people. And I walked into the prep room asking Joe Ashcroft, what was that Tim said? What's happening in the Bohemian people in Myanmar? All was eventually explained, and we had a very good debate. That is a exceptional point to make. Matter is something that often pros will be like, I don't know how to teach matter. It's a debating tournament. How do I teach them all of the content in the world? Obviously, your role is not to teach them all of the content in the world. It's about giving them the skills necessary to A, debate when they don't know a huge amount of things, like figuring out how to debate from first principles, helping them see beyond the main context, get to that underlying analysis where they do know some stuff, and then relinking it back to that main analysis. like some people call this bullshitting, but it's actually just like debate, like it's just debating, right? It's just getting to the heart of things that you don't necessarily understand to a perfect degree, but still understand enough about. Like that is an incredibly useful skill. And then of course the second thing is to some degree upskill them. So when you are teaching them how to jump between those layers of analysis, stuff that you don't really know, things that you do know, linking those particular things, you're also helping them establish that like basic band. I can't remember, someone quite old said to me, Daniel, I've just done every debate that there is, and the words around those motions change, but the debates are essentially the same. And that's true. Like helping speakers identify particular gaps in their reasoning skills, like they're not particularly able to talk about human incentives, or they're not particularly able to understand accountability, or like there's lots of these underlying arguments that once you have that baseline content, then you just, all of the other like content stuff is just like icing on that beautiful cake. So you're upskilling people at that basic debating knowledge competencies, how to analyze incentives, how to analyze accountability. Very important. And then of course, just the last thing is teaching people how to upskill, how to learn about things, how to gain media. Like often you'll have an AM at the end of a tournament be like, fuck, how do you know so much? And you're like, well, I listen to a lot of podcasts, or I have a well-curated Twitter feed, or like there's lots of things you can do to boost your knowledge. And that's one of the things that's most frustrating for AMs, because they're just like, how on earth am I going to catch up with knowing all of these things? And you're just like, yo, it's bite size. It's just like little bits of knowledge that you're able to add up on each other. So yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. I also agree. I think that matter and content-heavy debates, motions at Pro-Am tournaments are incredibly useful, both for the matter, but also because like matter changes the way that debates operate. So it's not just about jumping between those first principles. It's also how to navigate like lots and lots of examples, and how to like separate points neatly, and how to divide your issues in a careful way. Like matter is like the resistance training of debating. There's so much you have to like wade through before you get to the heart of the debate. So 100% agree. And in fact, I went to Auckland IV when I was second year with Joe, and he was fourth year, and I think that was also like a great experience, because it didn't just teach me different matter, it also taught me slightly different approaches to debating. And of course, that's the excellent thing about both speaking with other great speakers. You should be always trying to learn from the other speakers that you speak with, even if you're speaking in a like very high level team with someone who's an equal level to you. You should be learning about those styles. So it's both about building the content and about building that different approach to debating. Excellent. Any more anonymous questions? Nope. Sick. Let's jump into talking about basically how to be an effective AM. Oh, we got lots more questions. Questions are flooding in. From Rob. How do you best gently put down a very enthusiastic AM who has lots of ideas and prep, but quite a lot of them are not very good, but the AM is lovely and keen, so you don't want to make them sad? This is not just an important point for Pro-Am tournaments. This is an incredibly important point for the health of your teams at high levels as well, because the worst thing in the world is where someone throws out an idea in a debate and you're immediately like, wow, that's super dumb for this reason. And you try and gently dissuade them from doing that point, but you kind of just brush past it. And then at their third speech, they're like, and here's our killer extra bit of analysis. And they just like Titanic your entire case because they fail to see the disjunct there. So yeah, really good question about how to deal with ideas that you don't think are good in prep or during debates. I think the first thing I would say is ask a follow-up question always. So if they suggest an idea, your first response should never be, here's what's wrong with that point. Your first thing should be a question that is tilted in a way to think about their weakness, because you want them to be able to identify it. And a lot of the time when they're bringing up dumb points, it's not because they are dumb, it's because the point intuitively sounds good, and you with your debating wisdom is able to like see beyond that like just see that one level down, and you just need to help them get down that one extra level before they spot that tension. So often questions I'll use will be, for example, well, firstly, just like explain that to me, and then maybe you've misunderstood them, so they'll be able to explain it, and then you follow up with a how does this point, where do you think this point fits into our speech? And then if it's in tension with another point, you'll be like, how do you think it plays with this point? And then hopefully they'll be able to spot that, or you just point out that there is that gap there, and you explain that you need to choose, and you explain why you'll go one way or the other. So it's not about the point being wrong, it's about how you prioritize particular things. And then, of course, if there's just like a logical inconsistency, just ask them a question about, okay, how does it play out in this goal? Making sure that they're at that high level, thinking through the thing that themselves, and then drawing their attention with particular questions at the end. And then always reframe at the end of your discussion about that point, then where you land on that point. So if you ask a general question, they still think it makes sense, and you draw attention to a particular thing, and they're like, oh, actually, no, now I see that particular problem. What you then do is you be like, okay, just to cap off chatting about this point, we think that this point probably won't work for that gap that you've identified. If we could find a way to fix that gap, maybe it would work. Are there any ways to fix it? Have like a little discussion with them, how to fill it in, even if you're not going to run that point. And then if you, and then at the end, just be very honest. Just be like, try to make the point work. It's in tension with something, or the logic doesn't particularly operate, or they're going to bring this particular thing. We shouldn't run it in this debate for this reason. Just be like, the opposition is going to run this thing, and then it'll overall probably fall out of the debate. So let's talk about another thing. So making it very clear where you stand on it, so that they don't suddenly pull that particular point once again out of the ether. And like sometimes that happens, and that's just an am. And sometimes letting them run that point is a like good way for them to learn, because then they get like smacked on that point, and you're like, yeah, that's why. Now you won't forget. Is an important skill. And sometimes they'll surprise you. They'll be like, well, I actually think this point is brilliant. And then it is brilliant when they run it. So letting go a little bit is fine. Like AMs are allowed to run dumb points as long as you explain why you don't think it's going to be a very effective point. So yeah, and like I have run an unimaginable number of dumb points. Not just when I'm an AM. I have gotten fourths in quite a few BP debates by running particularly rogue like extension material that doesn't fully make sense. But what you're trying to do is build into them a self-reflective lens, so that they can start spotting these problems by themselves. And then secondly, making it very clear what you think the outcomes of that point will be, and whether or not they should run it. That's a very good question. What kinds of questions should AMs ask their pros to make the most out of the tournament? Okay, excellent. So I think this leads beautifully into the second half of this discussion. If you are an AM, how should you be approaching a particular tournament? Let me take this up. So if you are a active AM and you are like, my pro's good, but I'm not sure how good my pro is, you're going to wanting to prime them for being a good pro as much as they're going to be trying to prime you to be a good AM. And so in terms of questions that I always love to ask was firstly just like ask 100 questions about like everything you can about debating. So like obviously just like overload them with questions, and that means that you can break down the awkwardness, and they'll hopefully be able to share stuff. But some of the particular questions that I used to ask was just like I love to ask where people have struggled. If you watch Noise from the bench, whenever we have guests, you'll like see like repeated questions that I like to offer our guests, and they're often things like, how did you make changes? What did you change? And the two parts, what did you change? And then that's where you get into a discussion of like why people wanted to make changes, what were things that they identified as weakness, and then the how did you make the change? How did they actually address it? What you learn there is not just the what, not just the style is something that's important. This is what a good style or bad style means. It's how you actually start putting these ideas into practice and improving. And as soon as you start asking them those questions about what was very useful to them when they were developing or when they were trying to push forward their debating, that's the moment where they start thinking about a little bit more reflexively about what they should be delivering to you, and giving and having that perspective. A question that is freezing a little bit. The second thing that's a group of questions that are very important. It's not just like their general questions about how did you get better at debating, but also ask questions about the debates that you've just had or the feedback that you just had. So at the end of the debate, be like, what do you think if we were to run this? The adjudicator said this. Do you agree? The adjudicator gave me this feedback. What more can I do on it? Often it's quite hard to answer questions that just exist in an abstract because, well, I don't know. I think the fact that I can speak for an hour in development seminars in relatively abstract terms shows that it can be done, but it's more useful when it is linked to something that has just happened to you, that you and your pro are on the same page. So often you'll like get off the same page and you'll be kind of speaking about different things, and it won't make a huge amount of sense, and you'll feel a little bit lost. That happens quite frequently. When you're talking about the debate that has just happened, obviously you're much more connected with those ideas. So ask lots of questions, particularly how should I do this? It will make you better. Thirdly, don't just ask questions about cases and content, and also don't just ask questions about like style and that type of stuff. Ask like technique-based questions. And what I mean by this is ask how you can be a better teammate. I think is a huge missed skill for debaters. And what I would say is that I used to really, and no, sorry, I still do pride myself on the fact that I think I'm a very good teammate. I think I help make debaters around me better. I often pass ideas forward. Like during my speeches, I try and make my fellow debaters really good. During prep times, I like to collect ideas and ask lots of questions and push it forward. And one of the most annoying things to me as a younger debater, and still as a debater today, is I don't think those skills are very well compensated in trials. Because obviously, I sometimes struggle when I've got new teammates every time. I struggle to reestablish that rhythm, and that throws off my debating, and it means that I can't be as contributive to my team. Don't let that fact that it doesn't show particularly well in trials dissuade you from developing those skills. People always focus on the speaking aspect of being a debater when it is like obviously very important, but also your team's success is your team's success. It's not your success. So saying, how could I make this point better? Or how could I have reframed your material? Well, ask them questions about their debating. Just being like, yo, the judge really didn't like that third point you ran. What could you have done to make that a point better? What are ways in which I could have supported our speaking later? What are the ways in which I can support it? Hey, obviously you spent a lot of time on this one point. Was there something wrong with the context that I put down? Or how could I have built up that context a little bit more? Like asking those questions about the overall craft of debating is very, very good. And remember, when you are asking them questions about their own debating or pushing them to get better, well, not just to get better, but like questioning their approach to things, that is one of the real values of being a pro. It forces, like, it's how's the way to best describe this? It's having someone watch everything. It's like, you know that classic saying, do what I say and not what I do. And then you have this little person who's just like watching everything that you do, and then you start thinking like, oh no, I actually really should signpost a little bit better. Like I'm setting a bad example. These are good things for your debating. And it is nice having like that young person there to a sense of responsibility that pushes you to actually not be lazy within your debating, and fix some of the problems that exist. The exec group chat is popping off. And then so only does it force you to be a little bit more of a role model, but also forces you to adopt a little bit more of a leadership role within your team. There are so many good debaters who underrate their leadership qualities within a team in terms of pulling the case one particular way or pushing to do particular things or just being the case generator, when they're actually like awesome case generators or awesome thinkers about debating as an overall skill, and they need to take more of an active role in driving those particular things. Looking at you, some of the brilliant Auckland second years that are used to being spoon-fed by the nice pros that you get to debate with, you are going to being in a pro-am relationship, and you being the case generator, you being in that position of responsibility, means that next, when you are in your high-up team, you are much more willing to take that leadership role within your team, make sure that everyone's on target, be more assertive about your particular case ideas, and just making your overall team a little bit better. And that's the last thing I'll discuss is particularly, well, unless you have any more questions, particularly with prep, I think there's an interesting balance there between telling them what the right answer is and listening to their ideas. So the way I approach it is very similar to all of these development seminars. So if you've been enjoying these development seminars, you can start mirroring the hilarious guarded language that first fundamental things that I like to think about. So whenever I am in a pro-am team and after I do my silent prep, my first questions, like, AMs really love to dive into points. Like, if you've ever debated with an AM, you'll like listen to your silent prep and they'll be like, we have 3 points. If they're like quite onto it, and you want to push them out of this habit of just like laser focusing onto particular things. So what you do is you'll have particular questions that need to be answered, and I would recommend that you use what is the comparative within this debate? What are the two positions that are being compared with? What is our framework? What are our priorities? And from that, you start generating particular points. I always ask my AMs, okay, what is the comparative? What is the world that they're going to try and push? And then what is the framework though? What are the priorities that both teams are going to assert? And then when you get them to step back a little bit during that prep, you just broaden their perspective and you could push them in particular directions. And you can say, what about this? What about this? So it just puts you in a position where you can drive the debate much more than if you're like, this is the case. Once you get past that point a little bit, and you start developing just like some rough points within your outline, get them really involved in shaping that point, and in a very structured way. So often, like, making the best point isn't as important as making the point in the right way. And building in habits. So I often am quite strict on with AMs, being like, okay, what contextual things do we need to think about? What is the mechanism? What is the relevance of this point? So you're looking at your impacts and weighing, and then getting them to do each of those things in their speech, and they'll feel a little bit comfortable. They'll be like, this is overly formulaic. I just want to go like rogue and like spray points everywhere if they're a good school speaker. And you just need to put the brakes on that a little bit and start getting them to think about those other things. Because remember, what you want them to take away is not every solution to debating, but it's them being able to have a conceptualization of what's generally important within debating, and then just moving on in general. I think the last thing is that when you're actually discussing the particular things that you want to run, there's a balance that needs to be made between letting them make mistakes and help like giving them a very clear model for how to do a little bit better. So, and I think I touched on this already a little bit when I was responding to Rob's question about how do you dissuade an AM from using an idea that's not particularly great. So you start with always asking those, just explain this question. So you get them to get to the heart of the point, what they particularly mean, and then start separating the wheat from the chaff with your more specific questions. Think about, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And then hopefully you'll find something there that can be made into a point and let them run it. Help them make it into the best point it is, while still being very honest and open about what you think the failings of the point are. So you're thinking, and just like you can frame this as concerns. Just being like, hey, I think this is a good point. I'm concerned that they're going to run this thing. Is there a way that we can think about strengthening that gap? So what that process does is it puts them in the driver's seat. So forces them to think about things. But remember, you will also be generating a case, because if you are not thinking about what the debate needs to be, it's much more difficult for you to direct them one way or the other. So yeah, they're in the driver's seat. You're exposing the gaps in their ways of thinking. So they start thinking about contextual gaps. So they start thinking about weak mechanisms. So they start thinking about, oh, this doesn't have much impact, or they start thinking about, oh, this doesn't fit into our framework debate. So helping them see where their points can have gaps. And if you're interested in a more elaborate discussion of that, we did an episode on responsiveness a while ago that I think is a really good just overview of everything that can go wrong in points. So in many ways, you are fulfilling that role of explaining to them what can go wrong with a point, and then they're retrospectively able to fill it in. And then just allowing them to experiment with points. So telling them, hey, not just giving them all the answers, just being like, hey, I'm concerned about this particular thing. Don't necessarily tell them how to fix all those problems. Try and get them to fix it. If they ask, hey, I'm really unsure how to fix this thing, I've identified this problem, how do I fill it in? Then you can start brainstorming with them, throw them a little bit more material as to how to deal with it. And then, letting them experiment. Also just encouraging them to experiment, because obviously I focus quite a bit on the formulaic approach. Like, you need to not forcing your AMs, but like encouraging your AMs to be quite thorough and like, to be very thorough in how they approach points, be methodical in the way that they deal with them, but also letting them know it's okay to try things. And that's where your follow-up comes in. So often I'll take like good notes on my AM speech, and then be like, hey, I noticed you tried an introduction. You called the other team dumb 15 times. Why don't we think that worked? So once again, throwing them firstly the opportunity to identify the problem themselves, how to fix it. Normally the judge will tell them what's wrong, but maybe won't have done a good job of explaining it, or if they did do a good job of explaining it, hopefully your AM has picked it up and is able to say it back to you. And then once again, honing in with specific questions, then giving those answers. So have that multi-step process. I don't think it's particularly useful for an AM to just like sit with a pro and like watch them do really good things. Like it's useful to some degree, but they're going to get that when they're in like very good teams, and they're going to get that by watching you give excellent speeches. And after your speech, like go hard with your speech. Like you need to be giving good speeches for them to learn, because they need to be inside that machine while it is producing the good outcomes come in your speech. And then after your speech, point out like, hey, did you notice I framed the debate subtly this way? Because if we convince them of this contextual factor, then a lot of other points will flow. Or, hey, did you notice that I underrated how important that their material here was, because we focused very strongly on this way of seeing a debate and this way of setting up a framework. So after your speech, being able to explain particular things to them, I think is quite useful. And that's why I think it's just like I know there's differentiation here, but there's like, I think there's a lot to be said for speaking later than your AM, but also not necessarily speaking first. Like the ideal is like an Austral style where you go pro AM pro, and then they have like a really good foundation to jump off of. They're doing like multiple things. Oh, Joe has given us some light. That's so nice of him. And balancing all those particular things. I wonder if he's going to be in the camera. No, he isn't. Amazing. Okay, let's see if there are any anonymous questions. And if you have any normal questions, just throw them into the chat. We've had a very fun discussion so far. I'm so thirsty. I had a intellectual property law essay due at 12 o'clock today, and I got to write basically the whole thing about like human cloning and human patenting. And I was watching Orphan Black with Tara before she moved back home. And we're like right next to the end, and I was just thinking, oh my god, this is about human cloning. I should definitely cite Orphan Black as a justification for why human cloning is awful. And then I was like, oh my god, Daniel, you haven't slept in like 14 hours. That's a bad idea. Don't do that. Any more questions? Hopefully I'm seeing all the comments. I'll have a look on my phone. It's a bad idea. Don't do that. Oh, it's my voice. Yeah, any more questions? No. Some stuff going forwards. Obviously a little bit inspired by Jurassic IV and Asia Queer Open, because that had a lot of pro-am in terms of what we're thinking about. But Club Night tonight, gonna be lit. Australs, such a good tournament. Often they turn up a little bit like weird teams, so a little bit of a pro-am setting. Okay, another question. Can you please say how I can improve debating, specifically how to gain knowledge? So obviously knowledge is a huge thing that people struggle with. And we might do just a whole episode on media diet and improving knowledge. One thing I'd say is just doing lots of debating. Like, remember, I remember earlier when I said that there was an older debater who's with us, like, I've done all of the debates. Like, that is actually to some degree true. And you build knowledge, not of just the knowledge, but which points to run. Like, you build up a bank of just general understanding of that just by doing lots of debates. And then, listening to lots of podcasts and reading lots of news, obviously big. Sometimes read books. Books are good. don't know how useful they are for debating, and talking to people. So talking to your friends about topical issues and things that interest them. Often I'll give myself practice motions from big tournaments, and if I don't recognize a motion, I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I'll Google that, and hopefully that'll match up with some of the other knowledge that I have in my head. It's often about like making links rather than just having lots of knowledge, because just like knowing a fact about the Sahara Desert is not particularly helpful in a debate about like North African terrorism. But if you know that the Sahara Desert is like has very little water, and you also know that the city of Tunisia, like a city in Tunisia, has X, Y, and Z thing, and you also know this little thing, like very soon, like a connection of random facts turns into debating. Neat. I'll give everyone another 2 or 3 minutes if they have any last questions, and then I will go pour myself in bed and wait for the amazing club night to begin. I've been burning the candle at many, many ends. Let me check the anonymous poll. Did I post the anonymous poll? I'm sure I did. Oh, it is a Joe. Everyone say hi to Joe. 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 You're in the street. No, I don't mind. I just wanted to point it out. Everyone can see you. It was just your head there. So Mohammed, we have Auckland Club Nights that you're welcome to attend even if you are not an Auckland member. There are, like, if you know Asia Debating has a Facebook page where they have lots of tournaments online. Umba says hi, Joe. And so if you're based in Auckland, you're more than welcome as soon as we're done with lockdown to start attending our events and become a member. And of course, you can always watch our videos. We produce a lot of videos, and so you can join that. Debating communities are these beautiful, fluid, interconnected things that you're very welcome to take part of, no matter where you are. And come to tournaments. Tournaments are fun. Yeah. What are big tournaments that are coming up? There's quite a few big online ones in Asia. If you are keen, Auckland Pre-Australs, if you could find 2 people who you're friends with to come and speak there, I'd encourage that. That's going to be an excellent tournament. I think it's in, what, a month? That'll be great. And Australs Trials. Australs Trials are very soon. Hope you will be at Club Night tonight to do the debating. And on that note, I will say goodbye to you.